Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the GitHub Copilot Bootcamp. My name's Anna, your producer for today, joining you from Redmond, Washington. Before we dig in, I do have some quick housekeeping. First, our code of conduct. Then I have 3 tips to help you make the most of our training. We seek to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and presenters. While we absolutely encourage engagement in the chat, we ask that you please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. Keep an eye on that chat. We'll be dropping helpful links and checking for questions. Our session is being recorded. It will be available to view on demand within 24 to 48 hours, right here on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel. And now, some tips before we dive into the training. Our bootcamp has 4 live classes happening between February 4th and 13th. If you want to receive class reminders or the recording link, register on the series page. You can find that link on the screen or in the chat. Along with our bootcamp, we have a Cloud Skills Challenge, and you can participate to receive a badge to highlight on your resume. To participate, just use the QR code on the screen or the link we'll share here in the chat. In the Cloud Skills Challenge, you will have access to a free course track on Microsoft Learn to deepen your knowledge of GitHub Copilot. And the last tip is that at the end of the session, we will share a 64% discount code for GitHub certifications, so stay tuned. With that, I'll now turn it over to our speaker today. Thank you for joining.
Everyone, I'm super happy to be here. Love to see all the people in the chat. Welcome, welcome everyone. My name is Pamela Fox. I am a Python cloud advocate at Microsoft, which means it's my job to help Python developers be successful with Azure, as well as other Microsoft products like VS Code, GitHub Copilot, etc. So it's really a lot of fun because I get to spend most days just playing with Python all day. And that is what we're going to be doing today. So our goal is to build a Flask web app with some Gen AI models in it, and to do it using as much GitHub Copilot as we can use, and try and explore a bunch of GitHub Copilot features. Now, to make this more interesting, GitHub Copilot just blogged like an hour ago about brand new features that are available, some of them in VS Code Stable, some of them in VS Code Insiders. So we'll see if we can try out those new features, but they also are brand new to me too. So that will be interesting. But we'll link that blog post and a video in the chat so that you can explore those new features as well. Let's go over to my screen with my VS Code. So here we go. I've got VS Code open and I am in an empty folder. So I am starting completely from scratch. And, you know, it's always intimidating when you're starting completely from scratch, right? You're like, all right, where do I even get started? And so, you know, we can go ahead and ask Copilot for help with this, right? Be like, all right, you know, I want a Flask web app that renders a simple form. Let's see what it's going to do for us. Okay, so this is really cool, actually. It used what's called the workspace participant. So there's actually multiple participants for Copilot. If you type @ in the Copilot chat, you'll see a bunch of the participants. So you can see @ workspace that's built into Copilot. And one of the things it can do is make a whole new project. So in this case, I didn't have to actually @ that participant. It just knew that I wanted that sort of functionality. But I could also really explicitly say @ workspace /new and say, oh, like new fast API app, which does blah, 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 right? So you can either, you know, just enter any sort of message and hope that it calls in to the right participant and the right functionality. Or if you know that you want this like new project functionality, you can say @ workspace /new, and then you get this this sort of functionality where it'll actually come up with the entire project. And wow, it came up with a bunch. So we've got. So it's suggesting like a main file, a test file, requirements, templates. Okay, so I'll go ahead and just click create workspace. And let's see if I can just put it inside this folder here. And now it's creating all of these files. So this is pretty cool because it's actually creating quite a few quite a few files here. So let me go ahead and look at the editor now. Okay, so put it inside this folder Flask template and put everything there. So I'll go ahead and just go into that folder Flask template. Okay. All right, and so let's check out what it made. So we've got app.py, which is the backend. And for those of you who don't know, Flask is almost the most, or probably still the most popular Python web framework. It's a framework that we can use to define all the routes that we need in a website and to be able to handle those routes. And so maybe some of those routes render HTML, some of them render JSON, some of them can make database calls, API calls, etc. Right? So in this case, we have a very simple Flask app that's rendering HTML templates. So we can see here that when we go to slash, it's going to render home.html. We go to about, it renders about.html. We even have a README. This is cool, the README. So does the README say how to run this folder here? Run the app by using run and debug. So it even integrated VS Code running into it. So let's see if I do run and debug. Actually, let me go ahead and make sure that I'm going to open specifically this folder in VS Code. Yeah. All right, here we go. Let's make everything big enough again. Let's reload. Okay. All right. So it says that to run this app, we can click this run and debug button here. All right. So let's try that out. Okay. It's opening up the terminal. It's opening up the debugger. And then let me go ahead and open my Edge over here so you can see. And it's running. This is really cool, really cool. Okay. So the reason that this run and debug worked is because this project also includes launch.json. And that launch.json describes exactly how to run and debug this file here, which is just really, really helpful. Okay. All right. So that's working. So we've got a Flask app and it's rendering templates. Those templates are in, home.html and about.html. If you haven't seen this sort of template before, this is called Jinja 2. It's a style of template that's very popular, and it means that we can define like a base template. So this is our base template. And then we can define these templates here that inherit from the base template and just customize what needs to be customized. All right, so that's set up. Now let's make it exciting. Let's actually, let's do something with it. Let's make it more interactive. So ultimately I want to have a form in here, right? So right now we don't have a form. So I'm going to say, can you add a form? Now, when we want Copilot to make edits to an existing project, then we have a few different ways that we can do it. Let me go ahead and get my Copilot extension back, because when I reloaded the window, it decided to hide. Okay. Let's see, Copilot chat, GitHub Copilot. All right. And I'm just going to reload my window. Let's see if we can get Copilot back. So this is the danger of trying to update to the latest Copilot right as it gets installed right before the stream. Okay, so it says that we've got it. Let me just try updating that. And all right, let's go and bring up Insiders. So for those of you who don't know Insiders, it's the latest version of VS Code. And so a lot of times if you want to like try out the latest features of VS Code, then you can use Insiders. So like with all the new stuff they just announced, if you want to like really try it, you have to go to Insiders. All right, so let's go Copilot chat and restart extensions so it can pull in the latest ones. All right. And here we go. Okay. Oh, Copilot. All right. Auto update. Da, da, da. Okay. And it's thinking about it. Okay. Let's try. All right. I'm going to quit VS Code and restart it. Try and get Copilot back. Oh, it's already running. Oh, thank you. I'm used to finding it from this menu here. Okay. Thank you. All right. So first tip is that in the new version of Copilot, there's this the little icon is up here. Thank you so much. I forgot that they changed where the icon went. Okay. All right. So we've got our Copilot icon up here. And we've got many different ways we can interact with Copilot. One of the ways is GitHub Copilot chat, right? So, in that case, we might like open up home.html and say like, oh, can you add a form to this web page, right? And so then GitHub Copilot chat will look at the context and then say like, okay, sure, let's suggest that. So this is one way, but then there's this new way of doing it that works particularly well for this, like, an application that has multiple files, and that's called Copilot edits. So what I'm doing is switching from chat to edits. And for that one, we can like add a few files and say like, oh, we want to work with home.html and app.py. And it's going to analyze multiple files in order to decide what all the edits are to do across them and then make all those edits. And so now I'm going to say, can you add a form to the web page and have the backend process the form? It should take a single input, a user question. Okay, so what you can see is that it is looking at the multiple files and deciding what the edits would be to them. And then it'll actually suggest these changes across multiple files, and I can review them in the editor. And it's using this really nice way of reviewing them, right? So it says, okay, it's going to have a route submit question. That's a post, and it takes in the question. And then it says, oh, that's a question received. That looks great. So I'll accept that. And then in the page here, it has a form that sends to submit question, and it says ask a question. Okay, that looks good. So this is Copilot edits, and it works really well when you've got a change that is going to be across multiple files. And I know some of my colleagues just only use Copilot edits now and don't really use the chat or any other way of doing it. Okay, so now we've got the form. Let's go and try that out and see if it is working. So now we can see hello. It says question received hello. Okay, great. So that works. And we'll go ahead and we could actually leave that running depending if it's in debug. So sometimes it'll be like in reload mode. Yeah, and in this case, it's actually in reload mode. So I'll just keep it running. All right, we have a form. Now we want to connect it to AI. And, so the first thing we do is we can connect it to a large language model in order to answer questions. And for that, I'm going to use GitHub Models because it's just the easiest way to get started with an LLM. So we'll go here and go to github.com/marketplace models. We'll put that in the chat. And this is a place where you can use all of these models for free. And the reason you can use them for free is because there's like a rate limit per day. It's only like, 200 requests or something like that, but it's usually enough to get started with. And so it's a great thing for this where we're just trying to prototype something really quickly, right? So I can select, like GPT-4o and then say, I could test it out here. Like, is there somebody had a question. Do LLMs speak Spanish? We can ask the LLM and see. We should have asked it in Spanish. Okay, let's try it in Spanish. Hablan español los LLMs. So here you can see that, yeah, so the good thing about LLMs is that they are trained on a very large corpus, basically, trained on the internet. The internet does have quite a bit of Spanish on it, which is great. And that means that LLMs generally are pretty good at Spanish and at lots of different languages. Now, if there's not that much data on the internet in a particular language, then the LLM's not going to be as good. But generally, that's a good thing about LLMs is that they at least have some understanding of non-English languages by default. All right, so I'm going to say use this model, and it's going to give me some example code with a couple different SDKs. So I'll try the OpenAI SDK because that's the one I know the best. And it says, first, I need to set up a personal access token. So we're going to generate a personal access token by going here, and I'll just say generate new token. And I'll sign in to my GitHub. This will be the hardest part. Get my 2FA. And here we go. Okay. All right. It's for GitHub Copilot. All right. So I'm just generating this token here. I don't think we even have to give it any scopes. All right. So here's the token. Try not to use my token, but I can also revoke it right after this session. And I didn't give it any scopes, which is good. All right, so then I'm going to go ahead and set that in my environment. All right, I'm clear, so you can't see it anymore. All right, so now we've got a personal access token. So we can go back to this page here. And we can grab some code. So it says that this is how we set up the client when we're using GitHub Models. So we'll go ahead and put this code here. Move that up there. All right. Go up here and import OS. Okay. All right. So that's our OpenAI client. So what you can see is that it's pointing at GitHub Models. And then the API key is actually the GitHub token, which is getting from the environment. We could also do, yeah, let's do that. So I've set that in this terminal here. It's in this environment. If I run it from this terminal, it should work. We could also do a different thing. We could say like, we'll just say to GitHub Copilot, make an M file to store GitHub token. Let's do that. Let's store it in an M file since that'll work a little bit better. All right, so it'll actually make the whole file. All right, and then let me grab the value again and stick it in there. Here you go. Okay, and stop looking at my token. All right. And then I'm going to say make app.py use the .env file. So it's going to modify app.py here. And what it's doing, it's bringing in the python.env package. It's loading that .env. It's getting it from there. And did it make any other changes? That looks pretty much the same. Okay, so we'll accept these changes. Cool. Okay, does it work? It's always a question. So let's see. Let's go back to our web page. And actually, we haven't even really used the API yet. Okay, let's use the API. So we connect to the API, but then we actually want to make a call to it, right? So when somebody asks a question, we wanted to do to actually answer that question. Okay, so when user submits a question, use OpenAI model to answer it. Let's see how it does with this. So here's the thing, is that LLMs are really good at code that they've seen a lot of. They're not as good at making code that uses really new SDKs. And the OpenAI SDK is a relatively new SDK. It's only been around in the last few years. In this case, I actually think it might have done it perfectly. So it says that when it gets in the question, it's going to make a chat completion with the question, with the model, with this temperature of 0.7, which controls the creativity, and then it gets back the answer. So let's try this out and see if it is working. Are you an LLM? It worked. And I'm impressed that it worked because oftentimes the LLMs will make up new SDKs. Now, there's a little trick. There's a reason why this one works so well. And that's because I'm using this thing called custom instructions. Let me get the docs for custom instructions. Here we go. So you all really should take a look at this. We'll put this URL in the chat as well. It's how you can get GitHub Copilot to behave more the way you want it to. So this is really good. Like if you find if you're using GitHub Copilot and you generally like it, but like sometimes like it keeps doing things in a style you don't like, in a way you don't like, or it keeps getting an SDK wrong and you use that SDK all the time, like you can direct it down a particular path. So let me open my user settings to show you what I've done. So you can see. All right, so user settings. Okay, I'm just doing it in my JSON. So down here, I have GitHub Copilot.chat.codegeneration.instructions. And you can see here, I've actually told it how to generate chat completions because I was getting so tired of it hallucinating the answer. So this is something you can do. It feels like cheating, but like if you're using a particular SDK quite a bit, or maybe it's an internal SDK or something like that, and it keeps getting something wrong, you can just tell it like, listen, like this is what you should do. And it only needs a little bit of guidance, right? I didn't have to paste in the entire reference for OpenAI SDK. I just said, this is what that function signature looks like. And it figured it out, right? So really, really good thing to take advantage of it. And you can use it for style stuff too. So I do have a repo where we've been collecting Copilot instructions, right? And so there's just a few of them here. These are ones from my colleagues. So these are instructions that they like to use in order to get the code outputted the way they like it. And let me paste that in here too. And you can also, I see a question like, how do we provide it with a brand new SDK? So in this case, I only did an inline text, but you can also provide your instructions as markdown files. So if you have, if you want to write more than just a single sentence, you can put it in a markdown file instead. Let's see. Okay, there you go. This is how you do it. So instead of saying text, you would say file. So let's say you have a new SDK. You would say like file new SDK.md, and then just put the function signatures of that SDK. Like you don't have to be super, super verbose. Like generally it just needs to know function signatures, return types, and then it'll figure stuff out. The other option is you can also like open the SDK in your editor if you actually have it local or like the docs local. But yeah, you could put that all in an MD and reference that with file. So this can be a really big help to get Copilot to really help you out a lot more. And if you do have any instructions that you're using that you want to share, send a PR. I just made a PR an hour ago with my colleague's instructions for Python because he is very particular about his Python syntax and wants everything to be done in the most modern way. So if you're looking for modern Python from your Copilot, definitely check out Anthony's instructions here because he has very good Python. And now your Copilot Python can be really good too. And of course, like these LLMs should hopefully get better because we also we give feedback to the Copilot team, like, listen, like it's giving us some Python that like isn't following the best practices because of what it's been trained on. Can we generally lead it to better Python? So as we go on, hopefully you don't need as many custom instructions, but it's really nice to be able to have that option now. Okay, so we have, all right, so we got the answer. So that's cool. Now let's let's make it a little more AI. Let's bring more AI in, right? So what we're going to do is make this into a Disney movie recommender. I watch a lot of Disney movies in my house. I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, but I even watched them before them. But yeah, so we're always trying to figure out what Disney movies should we watch next, right? Now we could ask an LLM that, and it knows about lots of movies, but there's a risk that it'll recommend something that isn't a Disney movie, and I don't have Netflix or Hulu or anything. I only have Disney, so I really want it to be restricted to Disney. So in that case, what we want to do is actually search a database of Disney movies and get the LLM to only answer based off of those movies. So fortunately, I do have somewhat a database of Disney movies in another of my repos. I have this JSON here. So this is a JSON that has a bunch of Disney movie titles, so just the titles, but we'll start with that. It has their titles and it has vector embeddings of the titles. If you haven't seen vector embeddings before, it's a way of representing some sort of input as a list of numbers. And there's different embedding models. So this one was done with the OpenAI text embedding 3 large model. And these vectors, this list of vector numbers has 256 numbers in it. So we call that the dimensions of this vector. So what happens is that basically once we have vectors for a bunch of different things and we've computed those vectors all with the same model, then they all live in this like similarity space, right? It's like the brain of the model. And then we can say like, hey, how similar is Snow White to Moana? Or how similar is Snow White to a movie about cats, right? So we can do similarity, we can do search, like there's a lot of things we can do when we have these vectors. So I'm going to go ahead and save this into my folder. I'll just say movies.json. Okay. All right. So now we've got that local. We can see a bunch of Disney movies here. And yeah, so now we'll ask Copilot to incorporate it. So going back to edits again, I can see why my colleagues always use edits. Edits is actually really good. So here, let me open up edits. Here we got edits. So now, but let's just to show some more stuff. We can also do inline chat. So let's do inline chat here. Let's try inline. So with inline chat, you can either do right click Copilot and editor inline chat, or you can just use the keyboard shortcuts shown there. So there we can see it's Command I for the Mac. So I'll go ahead and Command I and say, calculate vector embedding of user question using OpenAI SDK and use it to find most similar movies from movies.json, which has movies as keys and embeddings as vectors. So I'm giving it a lot of instruction here with the hope that if I'm, give it a lot of instruction, then it's going to give me a good response. So hopefully it's going to put that code here. So I like to use the inline edits when I know that there's like one place where I'm going to be changing the code and I want that code change to be very focused on that one bit of code here. Okay. So let's see, we got an embedding response. I used the wrong model because I didn't tell it the model, and most things use this 80002, the older model. So we'll change that. That's fine. We got back a response. It's opening up the files. It is sorting through them and using a this looks like cosine similarity, which is the good thing to use. And it's used NumPy for that. So that's interesting. So I'll have to bring in NumPy. And then it's coming up with the best score and best movies. Okay, so this is a pretty good start here. And then we've also changed some imports here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and change this to the right embedding model, because when we're working with embeddings, we have to match the embedding model and the dimensions. So if I originally embedded my data using text embedding 3 large with 256 dimensions, then if I'm searching that data or trying to find similarities in that data, I need to encode my new query using exactly that model and exactly that dimension. So I'm changing that there. And then we get back the best movie. I actually want it to be best. I should have been more specific. I want it to be the best 10 movies. So I'm just gonna highlight this and do the inline chat again. And we'll say, please, to be nice, please get 10 best movies and store their titles in a list. And we'll find out soon what the answer is going to be. We actually have not yet watched The Emperor's New Groove in our house, so maybe I'll have to watch it after this stream. I think I liked it. I just can't remember if there's scary bits. I think there's a Cerberus in it. Might be the issue. Okay, so now we've got, it has redone it, so it now has top 10 movies. All right. And so now I can be like, okay, so now my message to LM is going to be, please recommend a movie based off of the user's question and these top 10 movie recommendations. So we're basically doing what's called RAG, which is where we give data to the LLM to help it answer a question and have that answer be grounded in the data. So we're going to, let's see, we'll just join that. Let's see. I'm just going to do dot join. Okay. And what's the variable name? Top 10 movies. All right. That's our, so that we can make that be our system message. Role system content message. All right. Will it work? Let's see. Cats. Let's just write cats. Okay, and it worked. So if you're interested in cats, I recommend watching the Aristocats. This delightful Disney animated classic follows a family of Aristocat cats, blah, blah, blah. Okay, all right, let's get something about emperors. I like royal stories. Let's see. Okay, we've got Cinderella, Enchanted, anything with Hercules? No. What's in Emperor's New Groove? Some stuff about kings forgetting clothing. Let's see how it does. All right, there we go. I recommend the Emperor's New Groove. Oh, well, not on the provided top 10 list. Haha. So this was something where our search didn't find it, but the LLM just really wanted to make it happen. Oh, we want ones about llamas. I like llamas. Oh, the Emperor's New Groove. Okay. I don't know if you know, but I dressed up as a llama for Halloween in honor of the llama models and Olama. And it's taken us 5 months to finally wash my llama costume because it's so hard for our washing machine to wash it. And so my partner was like, you should wear your llama costume for your next stream. I didn't know that llamas were going to come up today. So I guess I should have worn the llama costume. Okay. So there we go. Now we've got this basic AI app working. It doesn't look very good, right? I think it could be a lot prettier and it could be nicer because right now we're doing the submit and it's doing, it's doing a traditional reloading the whole page. Ideally, this would be more of an interactive application. We could submit, like maybe even eventually have a conversation that goes on and on. So let's do some refactoring now that we've got the basic functionality working. So I'm going to go to edits again. And let's also go ahead and try and turn on some new Copilot stuff. So I'll go up to settings and let's see, user settings. Okay, that's a JSON version. I'm going to open up this version. So Copilot, and one of the new things they recommended was next edit suggestions. So that's where Copilot is trying to predict what we want to do next. And I've actually never used this before, so I don't even know what it's quite going to look like, but we're turning it on and we're going to see what happens. Okay, so now we've got that turned on. So we'll see if that if that affects anything. But the first thing I want to do is change this so that it's actually using JavaScript to submit the question instead of reloading the whole page. So let's say use JavaScript to fetch the question response from the backend. All right, so it's modifying the form. Okay, so what we can see is it's got a block for scripts. That's nice. That's a good practice to have a different template block for scripts. And that script is doing a post. In this case, it's doing it form encoded. We could change that maybe to HTML. So let's see. So it said only, all right, I'm actually going to discard in this case and get a little more specific and said, and change the API to be JSON. So I wanted to change both the front end and the back end in this case in order to be a little nicer, a little cleaner. All right, so in this case, it has changed it now. So it's sending JSON and getting back the answer. And it also says that it needs to change this one to return back JSON. All right, so let's accept. We'll accept over here and accept here. Okay, so I think we've accepted everything. All right, so now what we should have is that when we submit the form, it should work. So let's see. Alpacas. All right, and what happened there? It looked like a whole lot of nothing happened. So let's make sure that, let's see what happens. We can open our network tab. And it basically looked like it submitted and then like nothing went through. So at this point, we might be like, all right, well, it looks like the form isn't working. Now, one problem could be is that our HTML might not be reloading. So one thing I might do is just stop the debugger and restart it. Because that debugger was picking up changes to our Python, but it's not always as easy to pick up changes to template files. So so let's actually go ahead and like look at the source of this page and see what this source looks like. So there's actually, oh, you know what the problem is? Let's see if Copilot can figure it out. Can you share? All right, so it looks like the form isn't working. Let's see if Copilot edits to figure it out. Looks like the form isn't working. Is it going to figure out that problem? Otherwise, I'll tell it what the problem is. But no, I think what it's happened is that it added this scripts tag, but I don't think this scripts tag is in base. And maybe it doesn't know that because we actually haven't added base to the edits one, right? So if we open base, you can see that base has a block for content, but it doesn't have a block for scripts, right? And maybe if we had base.html when we asked the question, it would have, figured that out. And I think now it's figuring out. I'm going to discard. Okay. All right, so now we've got block scripts. We've got scripts here. All right, so let's reload this, check the source. Okay, so now we see some JavaScript there. We can open this up. We can reload. Alpaca. Submit. All right, there we go. So that works. We're getting ours back again. I think it really needs to be prettier. It needs a loading generator. It needs various things. I did see a request about deploying to Azure. We could try that now if you want to try it and see how that works. And yeah, I didn't practice that, but you know what? This is all live, so let's try it out. So now we've got this thing running, right? So now I want to like deploy to Azure. All right. So if I do what you'll see is that I have a bunch of agents, and I have this agent called Azure. Azure is, or I guess we're supposed to call them participants. I have a participant called Azure. So Azure is a participant that's specific to Azure. It can look at the Azure docs. It can make lots of suggestions specific to Azure. So if I want to be like, what would be a good host for this Flask app? Let's see. Let's see what it says here. Yeah, at this point, I'm just doing what you tell me to do here. So what you can see, it says Azure App Service. And App Service does actually have built-in support for Flask. So it's a pretty good fit for it. Can you deploy this app to Azure App Service? I actually usually use container apps these days, but I sometimes use App Service. So let's see. Let's use AZ. Can I use AZ CLI? Maybe like AZ web app up. Let's see. We'll just say let's use Azure CLI. Okay. All right. Okay, so it's giving me a bunch of instructions for how to do that. All right, well, that sounds interesting. What about, okay, can we instead use Azure CLI to deploy to container apps? Because I kind of like container apps. All right, so how does this work? Okay, a resource group, a registry, a Docker file. So that's nice, is that now we've got a Docker file. Using a pretty old Python. I got to put that in my custom instructions. Don't be recommending Python 3.8. That's old. Okay, so we have a lot of instructions here, but let's do the Docker file. All right, and we'll change that to like 3.12. 12 is good. Okay, Python app.py. And I actually don't think the app.py is actually quite correct. We'd have to do if name equals this one. Yeah. And then hopefully it would run. So let's just say, can we test the Docker locally? Let's see what the requests are here. Requested to use poetry. Yeah, you could ask it. I think Copilot knows about poetry, pretty well. In this case, okay, we got a different Docker file this time, and this one's actually more correct. So I'm gonna bring in this one because I like that it's using Flask run. That's a bit better. Although actually this is not production ready. So I'll go ahead and say, is Flask run good for a production app? I see a question from Mario. Can you add more participants via extensions or otherwise to GitHub Copilot? Yeah, so you can make your own participants. Some of my colleagues do that. Like my colleague made a participant last week that adds like DeepSeek support to GitHub Copilot. So you can use the SDK in order to build your own participants. I actually haven't done it myself because I think most participants are written in TypeScript, and I spend most of my time doing Python. I still do a lot of TypeScript, but in theory, I spend most of my time doing Python. So yeah, but you totally can write your own participants, and I have a lot of colleagues that have done that. All right, so now this is good. Now we're getting much more production ready recommendations here, right? So we're gonna update this file here to have all the requirements. And here's a little tip. When you use GitHub Copilot, it'll often recommend Python package versions that are out of date, right? See how it says Flask 2.0.1? We're actually into 3.1.0 now in Flask. And the reason I know that is because I have an extension installed that will automatically put the latest package numbers on top. So you got to get this extension if you use Copilot or LLMs. It's called we'll find it. let's see, I think it's called like the PyPy helper, Python PyPy assistant. Yeah, so get this Python PyPy assistant. I'm just gonna paste the install ID in chat. And there's another one too that works across different languages. So whatever you all use, just recommend it in the chat. Because now I can go ahead and see like, oh, okay, like it gave me old versions. I want to get the newest versions, make sure I have all the security updates, right? Because an LLM is never going to know the recent version unless it actually looks it up on PyPy, which is what this one is doing here. All right, so now everything is up to date with the latest version. Great. And then we'll paste this one in and say from 312 Slim. And now it's using GUnicorn. So when I asked it, that's the thing is that sometimes from Copilot, like you get suggestions that are based off tutorials and samples and stuff like that aren't necessarily, production quality. But if you then ask Copilot like, hey, what about this app isn't secure or, isn't following best practices, then it can do a really good job. And especially one thing that's fun is to ask that question and ask it with different models. So here I'm on GPT-4o, but I could change to O1. We also have Gemini 2.0 Flash now. That I think just got announced today. So you can always ask your question multiple times, right? So we could go like ask this question like app.py and be like, what security enhancements should be made to this app, right? So then we can get recommendations. This one's with GPT-4o, but I'm saying we can change this to O1 and see all the different recommendations, right? So it says HTTPS, validation, secure headers, session management. Okay, but then we could go like ask the same question to O1 and see what kind of other response we get back here. And see and kind of compare. Oh, there we got some. Okay, I didn't know it actually. So here, it actually gave specific recommendations. So Flask WTF, that's to be used with forms to protect from CSRF and forms. Talisman is actually not one I've used before. That's interesting. We've got rate limiting. If this is a public app, you want to do rate limiting. You could also set that up with like Azure API management or Azure Front Door. Error handling, you always want to do custom error handlers. So this is really nice. This was great. From O1, it immediately figured out I had an O here is that I had debug equals true. And we never want to put something into production that has debug equals true. So typically I'm not gonna pass it in this way. So that was a really good call out here. And then it suggested similar things to the other one. So with this kind of question, like what security enhancements should be made, it's really nice to be able to ask multiple models and get multiple opinions, right? Okay. All right, so we were doing that. All right, so let's see if this Docker file actually runs, right? If it'll actually run locally here. Oh, that's a good point. My Docker is not running right now because normally I shut down my Docker before I do a stream. And also, I'm not even sure if Docker is working right now because it had an issue on Mac recently. Okay, yeah, let's see. Using Docker for work. Skip. Okay. All right, maybe it's working. Let's see. DD. Okay, so it's building the app there. And then I can try running it once it builds it. All right, let me see what other questions we have. Let's also try, okay. All right, so it built that. All right, so then we can try the next step, which is actually to run it. And yeah, I need to do a new port because I'm already running on, so I can also just stop the debugger so that to free that port. And there we go. Okay. All right, we'll change the port here. It's exposing 5,000. I think we have to do 505. Let's try that. Okay. All right. It says it's running. Okay. And what do we want? Caterpillars. Dos oruguitas. And let's see if it's going to work. We should have logs. Oh, there we go. So it recommends A Bug's Life if I do like caterpillars, but it also talks about Encanto, which is Dos Oruguitas, which means two caterpillars, and it's a beautiful song from Encanto. Okay, so that's working. It is now working locally with Docker and using GUnicorn, which is something we can use in production. All right, so that's really cool. Now, I know you want me to deploy this to Azure, but it does generally take time to make those Azure resource groups, and I want to make sure we can do a few more Copilot things. But basically, if I was going to deploy to Azure, I could use that at Azure CLI in order to get instructions for how to do it and get some step-by-step instructions here. It can also help you with setting up Bicep. So it knows a lot about Bicep. Usually that's what I use when I'm making an app, is that I use infrastructure as code so that I actually write the Bicep and then deploy it that way. But you could totally follow the Azure CLI commands as well. Now, what I actually want to do is make a refactoring of this app, because here's the deal, is that I know that this session was called Build a Flask App with AI, but I actually don't think that you should be using Flask for this kind of app. Because the deal with Flask is that Flask is what's called a synchronous framework, which means that when multiple requests, like when it gets a request and it needs to call the LLM, it's that worker who's processing that request will not be able to process any more requests. I've got a diagram of this on my blog. Let me find Box blog concurrency. Okay. We'll stick this in the chat. Okay. So this is what happens, right? If we use a framework like Flask and we have a certain number of workers that are handling the threads, like you saw with GUnicorn, like we booted up like 4 workers, and it gets a request, it goes off to OpenAI, it tries to answer the answer. And while it's doing that, it can't handle any more requests because it has to wait for the response. Now, what we can do instead is use an asynchronous framework. And with an asynchronous framework, what happens is that it'll make a request to the LLM. And while it's waiting, and it can be waiting a long time because LLMs can be a bit on the slow side, it can still handle more requests from users. So you'll get much better performance. You can pay less money if you use an asynchronous framework. So the next question might be like, well, what is an asynchronous framework? And don't worry, I have a blog on that too. Let's see. Fast API first Flask. Okay. There we go. There's 2 main ones that I use. I use Quart or Fast API. Fast API is probably the most well-known one, but Quart is actually just the asynchronous version of Flask. So since we're already using Flask, we might as well just port to Quart. And it's also fun to say, we're going to port to Quart. And we could use Copilot to do that. So let's go back to edits and, let's see what we have open here. We might want to add our requirements to our files here. Okay, and then I would say port the Flask app to Quart. So here, I'm going to hope that it knows enough about Quart in order to make this app use the Quart framework instead. Okay, so it rewrote our requirements file. So now we're requiring Quart. And then it rewrote this file to bring in Quart instead of Flask. And as you see, like a lot of Flask and Quart are the same. They're actually based off they both are based off the Flask code base. But there's a couple differences, and it knows those differences, which is great because I always forget, even though I use it all the time. And then it also made some changes here. So it changed all of the functions to async def. So you see how it says async? That's all because now we're in Quart, we're using asynchronous routes instead. Okay, so it ported it to Quart, and so now the question is, does it work? So let me just run it this way and see if it works. Okay, and butterflies. We really need a loading indicator here. All right, recommending Bug's Life again. Very good. Okay, so that worked. However, we're still not following the best practice here because we want to use an asynchronous framework so that we can then make asynchronous calls to OpenAI. This is still making synchronous calls to OpenAI. We want to make an asynchronous call, and you'll know it's an asynchronous call if you see a wait in front of it. That's your cue that that's an asynchronous call. Now, the thing is, every SDK has a different way of doing async. And so one way is to look at the docs and figure out, oh, how do you do async? The other way, of course, is that we're going to bring up our Copilot over here that I'll never lose track of again, and ask, can it use, let's go to edits again, since we're liking edit. Can it use async OpenAI instead? And let's see what edits it suggests here. Okay, let's see. So what you see, like, you can actually watch edits, like, go through the file line by line. And what the first edit I see is that it changed. So we go up here, it imported async OpenAI instead. So that's correct. So now we're using async OpenAI. And now we see an await in front of the call and an await in front of the chat completion call. And there we go. So that looks correct. So in this case, it knew how to do it for that SDK, but every SDK is going to be different. So like the Azure SDKs actually have a different approach to a slightly different approach to how they can be used asynchronously. So that's the important thing, is we want to use an async framework with an async API. And then we can reload this and say dogs about for computer, or wait, movies for computer programmers. Oh. Tron Legacy. I forgot that was are these really? Oh, and then it says if you're open to suggestions beyond the list. So Tron Legacy is maybe the only one I'll find on Disney Plus, and the rest I'd have to get somewhere else. Great. And so there we go. So now we're doing a asynchronous, and so now I'm feeling better about this because we're using the asynchronous framework Quart with the asynchronous version of the AI SDK. Okay. So we've got a few minutes left. Let's see what else we can show in that period of time. But basically, okay, let's do like some, like what we showed here. All right, actually, let's try agent mode. Okay, now we know where to find GitHub Copilot. It's up here. So now you can tell I'm in insiders because it's in dark mode. And I guess I use dark mode for this one. So let's open the user settings and let's see if we can find this agent mode. And let's see, agent Copilot. Let's see, update. Okay, I'm gonna update to switch to release version. Let's see if that's gonna do it. Let's see, I'm gonna try uninstall. Oh, okay, fine. Update. Okay. This might be because I've been testing other extension. Okay, all right. Okay, so I don't think I can easily switch to the agent mode there. All right, so in VS Code stable, we can use Copilot edits. We can use Copilot chat. Let's see if we can get, what are going to be the next? So now we've got this new thing enabled, which was the, next edit suggestions. So I wonder where that's going to show up. Would it show up over here? I don't know. What other edits should we make? Okay, and I see, and there's some questions here. Yeah, which LM is best? All right, so I also say that right now I'm using GitHub Models for GPT-4o, and the nice thing about that is that we can easily like swap out different models, right? So if we wanted to, we could go and like switch to any of the other models that are on, on here, right? So we should even be able to switch to DeepSeek. So let's just try DeepSeek and see if it's going to work here. So DeepSeek, let's just try this to. Okay, all right, I'm gonna, it's still thinking about edits here. Okay, no, I'm just gonna discard. No, do not edit that file. Okay, all right, let's try this as DeepSeek. And remember, this is using my GitHub token. This is not what I would use in production. In production, I'd be using managed identity, and I have a sample that's with Quart and managed identity that you can get started with. And here it is. And that's all using keyless auth with Azure OpenAI with managed identity. I also, by the way, if any of you are interested in Python, in DeepSeek, I've got a DeepSeek Python sample specifically. I just came out with it this week and I haven't actually promoted it or anything. So you'll be the first to check it out. And also for those of you interested in RAG, This is our most popular RAG solution. I've been doing a Reactor series for the last few weeks all about it. So if you do want RAG, check that out. And those will have more production ready code and as opposed to this one. All right, but let's just check out. We got 0 minutes left, so let's see. Oh, did it delete my form? All right, there we go. Okay. I'll have to try DeepSeek after. All right. So thank you everybody for joining me on this very live journey of using GitHub Copilot in order to make this web app. I can put this code into a gist as well afterwards, or into a repo or something for those who want it. But I also recommend you check out the repos that I just linked. And yeah, there's always more to learn about GitHub Copilot. As you see, there's new features all the time. I'm always learning new stuff. So just, stay tuned to the VS Code channel, to the GitHub blog, and we can all keep learning along together. Bye, everyone.
Thank you for joining, and thank you to our speaker. Our discount code is already available on the screen and in the YouTube chat. Please note that it is valid for 4 days. Use the QR code next to it or go to aka.ms/info-github-certs to follow the steps to redeem your discount. There's a limit of 1 GitHub discount voucher per person. This offer is non-transferable and cannot be combined with any other offer. This offer is not redeemable for cash. Taxes, if any, are the sole responsibility of the recipient. Microsoft reserves the right to cancel, change, or suspend this offer at any time without notice. We'll keep this code on the screen for about a minute, and we'll see you at the next one.